It is difficult for persons residing at a distance and not to the manor born, to conceive the extraordinary degree of ignorance in which the ladies of the great manufacturing families are brought up, as to the real conditions of the people employed in the concern from whence their wealth is derived. There is, however, a homely proverb that may help to explain this. You should never speak of a rope in the house of a man that was hanged. And it is probably on the same principle that no one speaks of the factory in the house of the manufacturer. Be this as it may, the fact is certain, and Mary Brotherton, like perhaps 100 other rich young ladies of the same class, grew up in total ignorance of the moans and the misery that lurked beneath the unsightly edifices which she just knew were called the factories, but which were much too ugly in her picturesque eye for her to ever look at them, when she could help it. Little did the kind-tempered, warm-hearted girl guess that for hours before she raised her healthy and elastic frame from the couch where it had luxuriously reposed through the night, thousands of sickly, suffering children were torn from their straw pallets to commence a long, unvaried day of painful toil, to fill the ever-craving purses of which her own was one. She knew that Sir Matthew Dowling was considered as the richest man in the district, richer even than her father had been, and this was all that she knew about him, except that her own sharp observation had enabled her to perceive that he was ignorant, vulgar, and most ludicrously crammed with pretensions of all sorts. After having looked into the face of little Mchl till she was perfectly convinced of his being exceedingly unhappy, she next directed her attention to his benefactor, as she heard him clamorously hailed on all sides, and his countenance, though smiling, spoke a language she liked not. It was evident to her that he was very keenly watching the boy, and more than once she detected a look from Sir Matthew directed towards him, which was instantly followed by an attempt on the child's part to look less miserable. Then followed all the nonsense about Mr. Osmond Norval and his promised drama, which was to place upon the scene some prodigiously generous action of Sir Matthew Dowling's towards this little boy. Mary Brotherton did not believe a word of it, and sick of the false and fulsome flattery that was bandied about between the knight, the lady, and the poet, she made, as we have seen, a somewhat hasty retreat. On her road home she was more than usually silent, being occupied in a meditation on the features of Mchl Armstrong. For some time she suffered her ridiculous ladyship to run on in a violent strain of panegyric upon Sir Matthew, his talents, and his generosity, without offering any interruption, but at length it struck her that fool as she was, Lady Clarissa might be able to tell her what she wanted to know, and therefore, after an answering "Indeed," to some tirade about Sir Matthew's great qualities, Mary ventured to come across the torrent of her lady's eloquence by saying, "Pray, Lady Clarissa, who is that little boy?" "Who, my dear? Good gracious, what an odd question! Is it possible you do not know he is a poor little factory boy, that Sir Matthew has most benevolently taken out of that sad way of life, because he behaved so remarkably well about that cow, you know, my dear, last night?" "But why should you call it a sad way of life, Lady Clarissa? It is the way of life that all our poor people get their bread, you know." "Yes, I suppose so. But yet, my dear, you cannot but allow that it must be a very different way of life from what little children lead whose parents, from father to son, for dozens of generations, have worked on the mains of one family. There can't be the same sort of family feeling and attachment, you know. However, I have not the least doubt in the world that good Sir Matthew does his very best to make them comfortable. Is this boy to live in Sir Matthew's family?" "I'm not quite sure about that. I believe it depends in a great degree upon the manner in which the little fellow behaves. So it ought. You know, my dear Miss Brotherton, I rather think Mr. Augustus was making himself too agreeable this morning for you to hear much of the story. However, the exquisite muse of our friend Norval will set the transaction before all the world in a proper point of view, and then you, like everyone else, will be able to form your own judgment respecting the conduct of Sir Matthew." Again Mary sunk into reverie concerning the respective countenances of Sir Matthew and the little factory boy. But feeling quite sure that she should obtain none of the information she was burning with impatience to inquire from Lady Clarissa, the part of the drive was passed entirely in silence on her part, excepting that when Lady Clarissa asked her if she did not intend to take part in the theatrical performances about to be brought out at Dowling Lodge, she replied, "No, certainly, Lady Clarissa Shrimpton, I do not."